Welcome to Outrage Overload, a science podcast about outrage and lowering the temperature. This is episode 42. In recent years, there's been a lot of debate about the impact of social media on our behavior. Social media platforms have become integral to our lives. They allow us to connect with friends, share our opinions, and stay informed about the world. However, they also have become notorious for fostering toxic behavior and polarized discussions.
It shocks me the lack of camaraderie, the lack of patriotism, the lack of connective tissue. You know, we're rotting from the inside out. Externally, I don't think I would argue we've never been this strong, but we're tearing each other apart from the inside. And I do think social media and media's cycle time that leads to catastrophizing everything gives us the sense that things are much worse than they are. And it's not another nation's fault, it's your neighbor's fault.
That's NYU professor and author Scott Galloway. From heated political debates to online trolling, the negative aspects of social media interactions are hard to ignore. As society grapples with the consequences of digital communication, researchers are digging deeper to understand the root causes of online toxicity. Many people believe that social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Reddit are making us more toxic, causing us to behave worse than we normally would in face-to-face interactions. However, new research suggests this might not be the whole story. Instead, it seems that social media simply attracts people who are already inclined to be toxic. And that's what we're going to talk about on this episode of the Outrage Overload podcast. I'm your host, David Beckmeyer, and today we'll hear from a researcher working on problems at the intersection of data science and psychology.
I'm Michalis Mamakos. I'm a postdoc at the Department of Psychology of Northwestern University. I work on topics on computational social science, digital democracy, and polarization.
Michalis Mamakos is here to help us understand this complex issue. He has led a groundbreaking study that delves into the nature of toxicity online, examining how people interact in both political and non-political spaces on Reddit. Their findings offer a fresh perspective on the role of social media in shaping our interactions. Listen in and discover what this means for the future of our online interactions and what we can do to foster healthier digital communities.
Our main conclusion is that online political discourse is in large part toxic because the people who opt into such discourse are generally toxic. It's not about the context. It's not about disagreement over political issues, for instance, but rather it's about people who are attracted by dividing and polarizing content. So first, we assessed how the toxicity of users in partisan subreddits is correlated with their toxicity in non-partisan subreddits. Subreddits that are about, for example, music, movies, programming, parenting, places where which are irrelevant to politics. And we found that the toxicity they exhibit in partisan subreddits is highly correlated with their toxicity in non-partisan subreddits. This implies that these people are toxic in general. It's not just about toxicity that has to do with politics. So we examined whether their toxicity was a product of a socialization process that happens in partisan subreddits, and we found out that this is not the case. Our results support that those people are dispositionally toxic. Like from the second they join the platform, they have the disposition to be relatively more toxic than other users. Now, there are other works, for example, Twitter, that have found that socialization effects do happen. We examined Reddit, where users go by usernames. right? You're not on Reddit, you're not David, you are whatever username you have chosen, versus, for instance, on Twitter, people usually go by the real names. And so there is the opportunity to gain status to show to the in-group that they do something well by derogating the out-group, for example, right? This can happen in Twitter. Versus in Reddit, somebody's not getting credit for their own negative behavior, meaning their behavior is not linked directly to their identity. So this is a reason we hypothesize that we don't find the socialization effect. Misinformation is definitely a big issue, and there's a lot of recent research on that, why it's disseminated, how it is consumed. For instance, and a popular recent account is that misinformation gets reproduced because people are not really bothered to think too much about it. Like they're lazy in how they consume information and how they expose others to that. That's definitely an issue, and it comes again a lot to what I believe a topic we should touch on is what are the structures of social media? How are discussion spaces constructed? Are they constructed to promote constructive discussions between two people, or is it just that there are massive amounts of people incoherently joining a discussion space without necessarily the ground to reach a constructive conclusion there? That's important because we need to take also into account that maybe we were not ready to participate in discussions with massive amount of people, right? This is relatively a first. We don't really know how to do it. This was not something that we had before, and now suddenly everybody has access to those spaces simultaneously. Yeah.
So does that mean that the intervention or the practice that might be an improvement would be sort of opting out more? Would that be one thing that individuals could do, or is that going to have its own negative effects?
It seems currently that individuals are already opting out, meaning if political forums are mostly populated by toxic individuals, then it's probably the conclusion to reach is that the people who generally want to have a constructive discussion have opted out. What is the solution for those people? Okay, I believe the action should be collective. Like first, if all of us decide to disengage from content that is especially toxic, it will be less likely that social media will want to promote that, right? They will be disincentivized. Like social media companies want our attention, our engagement, so that their product can grow. But if we all disengage from such content, I think that's the first step. The second step is, okay, and we engage with what, right? Which are the spaces that we have? I think that's a difficult question that we have to investigate now. I think the biggest problem is not that people get exposed to toxic content, but rather that now there's a platform given to people who are generally, especially toxic, right? One, policy-wise, I think we should focus on how we moderate content on online platforms, right? For example, okay, Reddit does some sort of moderation. It seems that this could probably be improved, but also its moderation is after a message has been posted, right? So maybe if I post something very toxic or off topic, the moderator will remove my comment. However, a direction that we can look into is how we can do moderation in real time. Like, don't even let the toxic content get out there, catch it before it's even posted, right? And this is a direction that I think is of interest to policies and to the construction of social media platforms. And I think with this regard, AI can be our friend. Like, I think it could help us catch toxicity as it's being produced. So it's about preventing something before it's even out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
We did have, though, a finding for echo chambers, which kind of relates to our discussion about how social media are structured to promote civil discussions. So we found that, besides that, people with partisan engagement are more toxic in non-partisan contexts than their counterparts who do not have partisan activity. We also found that those differences are the largest for the people who have activity in both left-wing and right-wing subreddits, right? So compared to people who have activity in only left-wing or right-wing subreddits, right? So bilaterally engaged users were found to be the most toxic, right? And this was discussions that had to do nothing with politics, right? Discussions about parenting and programming, for instance. Okay, so what do we see here? We see that Reddit has given an opportunity for people to join discussions with the other side, because with some exceptions, everybody can join a subreddit. Like, in some cases there are some restrictions, but generally, at least in the past, there were fewer such restrictions. So if you're a left-wing person, for example, you can join a right-wing subreddit and have a discussion there. But the people who exploited that opportunity are not people who meant well. They're people who wanted to pollute basically the public sphere, right?
Sort of more or less trolls when they're going in the opposite group.
Right. I'm sure. First we examined millions of people. So, and focusing only on the people with partisan engagement, it was more than 1 million of them. So, I'm sure some of them are people who were looking for a constructive discussion, but comparing the means. So this is to speak overall. We did find that it was that bilateral engagement was for trolling, as you said. There's a lot of research also nowadays on meta perceptions, right? How polarization is conceived by people of the one side. Like, what do they believe about the people what do they believe that the people of the other side believe, right? And we see this gross overestimation of the perceived hatred, right? And it's difficult for an average user to say, okay, this is what I see online. The selection effect of the samples of the information that's conveyed to me is that much. So, you know what? The true polarization must be something like that. Well, no, that's not reasonable to expect from a person in general. And it is an issue for sure. Okay, let's stick to our guns about having constructive conversations as much as we can, and then, and once we get there as society, policies can start being effective. Like, we can start about how we can reconstruct online spaces, and about how we can design interventions in policies that promote constructive discourse. But let's first do our part, and we'll get to the other parts then. I do want to say, though, something relevant is that we didn't find any difference in the effect for left-wing users versus right-wing users, where this classification was conducted based on which subreddits they joined the most.
Mm-hmm.
Something that is different, or something that appeals to affect, right, to how we feel, or to our morality. these are topics that are generally attractive. But I think it comes down to personal responsibility about resisting to pay close attention to such content, because we can be having here a conversation about what social media companies do, about how policies can regulate content, and all of these are discussions that we need to have, absolutely. However, if at the level of individuals, at our personal level, we don't take the responsibility to take action for that, then I think there's not really much to be done by any policy or any platform. So I think that such people always existed, and they will probably still exist. This is how societies built, but they are disproportionately represented, right? Exactly as you said. Like now they have that platform. Like it is likely that we have built a megaphone that amplifies the voices of those who have especially uncivil tendencies. And of course, a person who is uncivil might choose to not engage in such discussions. Maybe you want to have a constructive conversation with a counterpartisan, but you know that once you join for a political subreddit, for instance, you will have to deal with all this toxicity that surrounds it. And so maybe you're like, you know what, never mind, I can live without it, right? And to the individual, there's not a lot of harm done by doing that. Like, okay, you will not have a discussion that you want to have. It's kind of important, but you can live without it. But then when every single individual does not have those discussions, then that's when the big problem, the collective problem arises, right? Everybody shuts down. Everybody's voice is shut down. And we have an overrepresentation of especially toxic people.
As we wrap up our discussion, let's take a moment to reflect on the key insights we've uncovered. We've looked at fascinating new research that suggests social media platforms might not be making us more toxic, but rather are platforms that attract individuals already inclined towards such behavior. User toxicity on these platforms is not solely a product of the online environment, but is deeply rooted in the individuals themselves. People who exhibit toxic behavior often show these tendencies from the moment they join, indicating that toxicity is a dispositional trait rather than a result of the social media context. Social media promised a new era of mass discussion, but perhaps we weren't quite prepared. The vast, often unregulated landscape can be a breeding ground for negativity. Even in seemingly neutral discussion groups, toxicity thrives, from both left and right-leaning individuals. This suggests deeper societal issues at play, not just problems with the platforms themselves. AI and better moderation tools can be valuable allies, but the line between filtering harmful content and censorship is a fine one. Ultimately, fostering a positive online environment relies heavily on individual responsibility. Users must consciously choose to engage constructively and resist contributing to negative discourse. These findings challenge the notion that social media inherently makes us worse and instead point to the importance of personal accountability and the need for better designed online spaces. By understanding the true nature of online toxicity, we can begin to develop more effective strategies to promote healthier interactions on social media. The question we need to ask ourselves is, are we contributing to a positive and constructive digital environment, or are we falling into the trap of negativity and polarization? By making conscious choices and advocating for better moderation policies, we can help create a more respectful and engaging online community. that is it for this episode of the Outrage Overload podcast. For links to everything we talked about on this episode, go to outrageoverload.net. If you enjoyed this episode, if you found it interesting, please tell some friends about it. Post it to your social media. Better yet, text someone. Even better, talk to someone in real life. Tell them about this show. I really appreciate it. Okay, see you in a week or two.